For this lecture, I'll be highlighting some of Davies' ideas about death and religion and secular life that you read in chapters 14 and 15. As we learned in the previous module, 19th and 20th century social scientists recognized the inherent bond between religion and death in their theorization of how humans, as individuals and as societies, understand and experience death. Your reading for this week explores not only the roots of religion and experiences of death and bereavement, but also how experiences of grief influenced religious founders and leaders. Davies mentions a few examples in particular, starting with Buddhism, which provides a fairly obvious example. The story goes that Gautama renounced his life to pursue a release from the bitterness of experience, having encountered a sick man, an old man, and a corpse. This engagement with human aging, decay, and death set the agenda for his pursuit of enlightenment and liberation from the ties that bind desire and existence. Christianity would be inconceivable as a world religion without the death of Jesus. One of the reasons for Christianity's success as a world religion is the universality of death and the belief in post-mortem salvation for all believers due to the sacrifice made by Jesus. George Fox, founder of the Quakers, or Society of Friends, fell into a 14-day trance that is said to have transformed him into a new man. This is reminiscent of the spiritual death and rebirth concept that was theorized by Maurice Bloch, and we discussed last week. Finally, within Mormonism, the martyrdom of the religion's founding prophet, Joseph Smith Jr., contributed in a significant way to its development. And it also brought further power to its second prophet and leader, Brigham Young, who was said to have spoken with the voice of the dead Joseph and to even have assumed his physical features. Davies mentions other leaders of the Shakers, the Christian Scientists, the Baha'i Faith, and even a group called the Institute of Applied Metaphysics, who also have close ties or experiences with death that appear to have been foundational to the religions they helped to create. Davies makes another point in chapter 14 that I want to draw your attention to, which is this. Did religion develop to help us cope with death, or did death become meaningful through religion? With the growth of secularization in recent history, we have begun to question the need for religion in death rites. Since we all die and encounter bereavement, what do secular contexts imply for the performance of emotion-laden rites? Can funeral rites be just as effective when set in non-religious contexts? For example, one could hire the British Humanist Association to perform a celebration of life. The bottom line is that death cannot pass without some form of recognition, be it religious or secular. Otherwise, it confers that the deceased's life was meaningless. This brings us back to the concepts of performative utterances and words against death that Davies defined in Chapter 1, and returns to on pages 242 and 243. For this week's discussion, I want you to review those topics and answer the following question. Do you agree with Davies that all words against death are religious? Does this matter? Why or why not? Later in the semester, we'll be spending whole modules exploring the beliefs and practices of death within specific religions. So for now, let's turn our attention toward the secular realm. The first and most obvious example of secular death and dying is humanist societies. This British Humanist Association that Davies refers to is now called Humanists UK, and there's a very similar organization here in the US. These secular rites can still embrace a sense of collective philosophy and a collective ritual. Humanist ceremonies are increasing regularly on an annual basis. These types of ceremonies involve a celebration of life. The life of the deceased person is acknowledged and celebrated. Their individuality comes to the fore as their life is detailed in its achievements. The significant relationships of the deceased are recognized, but this isn't only just their family and friends, could also be special colleagues, work guilds, or hobby clubs that they belong to. All of these aspects of their life are brought into this moment of celebration. If anything, it emphasizes the worth of the individual as part of a greater community. And this harkens back to some of those ideas we saw with Arias's work, talking about the individual versus collectivity in terms of the meaning and conceptualizations we have of death. Cremation, is yet another example. Against the millennium and a half of Christian burial practice, the adoption of cremation in the late 19th century marked a major social change. This new practice was more readily adopted among Protestants than Catholics. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church opposed it until the 1960s, but it has steadily grown in popularity over time. Cremation facilities in and of themselves offer a more neutral ideological territory for the deceased than a large church. The lack of clearly religious symbols within the facilities can make them more welcoming to the secular population. People of any Christian denomination, as well as Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jews, and atheists, are all welcome. The popularity of cremation in some ways can be associated with the privacy it affords the loved ones of the deceased. While some choose to keep the remains of their loved ones with them at home, there are also options when it comes to choosing a location for the scattering of their ashes. Cryogenics, which involves freezing the body as soon as possible after death and keeping it in a deeply frozen state until some future date when medical knowledge will be able to cope with the illness from which the person died. This process has been highly developed in some parts of the U.S. and involves teams of specially trained people who will attend to the person as soon as is practically possible after their death. They take the body away to a treatment center and prepare it for long-term deep freezing, which involves replacing the blood system and administering special drugs to attempt to offset brain damage. One such company is the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, which you can see in the bottom photo here. In a slightly indirect way, we may compare cryogenics with the ancient Egyptian mummification, in that both prepare the body for a future life, even though the Egyptians saw the future in a heavenly realm, while cryogenics firmly locates it on Earth. But cryogenics also resembles the beliefs of many other religions in expressing a profound optimism that death is not the end of human life. This hope in surviving and survival stands as a distinctive feature of some human beings at all periods of history. This case simply invokes an apparently scientific procedure as the basis for the hope. Davies discusses a very publicized case in the UK of a 14-year-old girl who was terminally ill and came upon cryogenics online, and then went ahead and expressed her desire to undergo this procedure. This wish had to be taken before a court of law because her father disagreed with the mother and others in her family in supporting the girl's wishes. The courts ultimately ruled in her favor, while also expressing concern about the wholly unregulated area of cryogenics. In the end, this is just it's a very new and advanced sort of approach to dealing with death that is going to involve a lot more regulation going forward. If you're interested in listening, I've linked to a podcast here that actually talks about an example of someone trying to get a cryogenics facility off the ground and doesn't go quite according to plan. The videos in this week's module provide you with some of the other burial options of the secular variety that are designed specifically with the environment in mind. So even though it's touched on a little bit in your textbook, these videos are very important to look at and view for other options that are out there in the world today. One of the final ones I'll touch on here that's discussed in the textbook is the idea of dataism. And this views humans as a complex collection of information that could potentially be transferred to computers. This means, a potential afterlife in the cloud of sorts, which has actually been a topic discussed in some popular media today. There's a series on Amazon called Upload that deals exactly with this type of topic. And gets into some of the details of the ethics around this, not only that, but also the technology that would be involved in actually uploading your consciousness to the cloud. And there's also a famous episode from the Black Mirror series that deals with this topic as well. So if you're interested in theorizing about what the future could look like in terms of our digital afterlife, those might be some fun sources to take a look at.